I trust the engineering of a reputable game company over a game or set of house rules that came from a single player or play group. Hello everyone, this is the Good Captain. Welcome to another video in my In Defense Of series. Before we get into the topic of today's video, I have a few points of housekeeping, so if you want to just skip this and go straight to the argument, I've linked in the description box below a timestamp where that starts. But anyway, the first area of housekeeping is regarding my defensive Twitch video. I actually got a number of inquiries about FaceTime for Axis and Allies games after posting that video. So let me be clear that the purpose of the Twitch defense video was to advocate Twitch as a replacement for YouTube only. FaceTime is not a streaming service, it's basically a video phone. I think a good analogy here is to think of FaceTime as an alternative to face-to-face play, while YouTube, and especially Twitch, is more like a play-by-email game. Now, YouTube and Twitch are uploaded to a server, so if your opponent has a busy working life or lives in another country, they can watch the video at their leisure and take their turn when they have time to do so. Now, the advantage to Twitch over YouTube is that the video is streamed live while being uploaded into the server. So I hope that clarifies things. The next point I want to clear up is regarding battle calculators. Really nothing in my argument here has changed, but I want to sharpen up when I believe you shouldn't use one. So just to recap, I said in my video that you should use one anytime it's allowed. So I want to focus on that word allowed. Now, I was thinking more about tournament play and yes, face-to-face play, but let me add something to what I believe about face-to-face play. So if you're playing face-to-face in a play group, again, I still think you should use them in every game, but if anyone in that group is not going to use one, and even if that person says they don't care if you or anybody else does use one, nobody in that play group should be using one. It's just not fair, no matter what anybody says. A fellow Axis and Allies YouTuber, Muskow, made a comment that I think is worth restating here. So either everyone uses a battle calculator or nobody uses them. Perfect. Next, I had a request to further explain why I don't use low luck dice. Well, it is a house rule, and you're about to hear my monologue in defensive out of box, but outside of that, let me show you an example of why I don't like or use low luck dice. So consider this a very brief field guide to the argument you're about to hear in the rest of this video. So this is a hypothetical battle for Moscow in Axis and Allies Anniversary Edition, okay? The defense is composed of 25 infantry, 3 armor, 2 fighter, and 1 AA gun. The attacking German forces are composed of 21 infantry, 2 artillery, 4 tanks, 4 fighters, and 3 bombers, okay? Now, using a battle calculator, we can see that the Germans have a 65% chance of victory in this battle, okay? Now, when we implement the house rule known as low luck dice, we see that percentage jump from 65 to 92. That's a 27% increase. So hopefully you can see for yourself here why I won't use low luck dice. So changing out pure luck for low luck is to completely change out the probability engine that the game was play tested with. So the analogy I like to think of here is it's like you're putting a tractor engine in a sports car. Now, it might look like a sports car when you're done making that swap, but it's not going to run like one. So in this case, it might look like an Axis and Allies game, but it's been fundamentally changed. And this is a really good preamble, actually, into my defense of just sticking with out-of-box rules. Just a couple more notes before we get into that. I've edited all my previous videos with respect to viewability, and by this I mean that I've edited out all the ahs and ums and coughing fits and pregnant pauses, and it's actually really reduced the time of each video. So you get the message and you can get on with your life. This is in an effort to make this channel more timeless. I do hope that all my videos stay relevant for many years to come. I know this is a lofty goal, but I think it's a healthy one to aspire to. So the subject of today's video is a defense of out-of-box rules. Let's start, of course, with a definition. What do I mean when I say out-of-box rules? Well, I mean quite literally using only what comes out of the game box of an Axis and Allies game. This includes whatever rules are in the rulebook and nothing else. It means using the pieces exactly as prescribed, not adding any homemade units or changing the attack or defense values. It means not changing the setup, which also means not using any kind of a bid. And for those of you who don't know, a bid is an allotment of IPCs allocated to what is perceived to be the disadvantaged side in an Axis and Allies game. So that's what I mean when I say out of box. The reason this is a topic of some controversy is because there's this overabundance of house rules that have been incorporated by players into their Axis and Allies games, especially in the face-to-face community. So I want to start this argument by laying the groundwork for why I feel pretty confident that I know at least some of the reasons so many of these house rules exist in this game system, and I think it can be traced to one or more of the following. First, Larry Harris, who is the game designer for Axis and Allies, has often been quoted as saying, "I always encourage house rules. As a designer, I have no problem with people tailoring these games to their own interests." So he seems to be in favor of just making your own modifications however you like, but I suspect this is for marketing reasons. I might get into that in a future video, but I'm not going to get into that here. Second, with so many websites dedicated to plastic pieces, plastic miniatures like historical board gaming, there's like an endless supply of unit types, which does encourage players who admire plastic sculpts to find a reason to get them onto their board. Third, many players community-wide agree that each version in the canon, that is the official, any official game in the Axis and Allies system, is imbalanced to some degree, so at the very least, a bid is necessary to have a fair game. Fourth, most, not all, but most Axis and Allies games in the canon take quite a bit of time to complete. So there is a clique of Axis and Allies players who modify their game with respect to time to help make them shorter. There might be more reasons than this, but I don't think they'd add much to the argument, so I'll stop here and get on with my counter-argument. But what I have to say applies to some degree to all of these points, but especially with point number 3, and that is of imbalance. So my defense of out-of-box rules really falls into two main arguments. The first is the bandwagon argument, and the second is the engineering argument. We'll start with the bandwagon, and just a quick definition. The bandwagon fallacy is that just because a lot of people think something or do something does not mean it's right or good to do. This is also known as groupthink in other circles, and to help frame this argument, I'm going to tell a brief story of something that actually happened in 2004 in the squad leader gaming community. It's not important to know anything about ASL, just hear me out here. So back then, a game was released which was immediately criticized by players as being highly imbalanced. One side was winning 80% of the time over the other, and in this community, there's actually a public forum where people can openly report wins and losses on any given game, so we can all see how imbalanced things are. So folks started discussing how to balance the new game, and by the end of 2004, it was so bad, and the game had received so much criticism that the game designer had to write an article in the community magazine, and in it he described one of the ways in which the losing side could win. It's even got color diagrams here. It turned out when you played this game in ways that were unorthodox, it was actually not only highly competitive, but very interesting. So it didn't take long for the game reports to shift far closer to 50-50, where it remains today. I hope it's clear what the cautionary tale is in this story, but just in case it's not, let me spell it out. The game designer had to give away the answer to the game he designed. He had to give away the answer to the brain puzzle he had made for all of us due to a bad bandwagon effect. So many players were so stumped as to how to win this game out of box that the designer himself had to intervene to save it. And this is such a bummer. And this stuff actually happens in every gaming community to some degree all the time. So you might be wondering, well, Axis and Allies definitely has imbalanced games in the canon. So where are any articles written by Axis and Allies playtesters and designers for those. Now, in point of fact, nothing like an article from a designer or developer is ever likely to be written about Axis and Allies ever. And this is, for those of you who don't know, because everybody in the Axis and Allies community involved with development had to sign non-disclosure agreements. I don't want to get off on a tangent. I'll just link my source in the description box below. Check it out if you want to know more about that. So it is disappointing that we can't get any official information from the game designers about Axis and Allies games that we perceive to have an imbalance, but all hope from hearing from that side of the house is not completely lost. So consider this part of the video a public service announcement to the Axis and Allies community. There are official errata published for every game from Classic to 1914 in the canon, and everyone should just go and print a copy out and throw it in the game box for each Axis and Allies. In this way, you can make sure that you're playing the most up-to-date version of the game. That'll be linked in the description box below as well. Now, these errata, let me pull it back out, are composed mostly of Q&A. So it's really, sometimes they're just clarifications, but not always. Sometimes optional rules are added in, which are, in my opinion, sort of a hint at balance. And sometimes there are changes in the setup outright. And this is the case specifically with Pacific and even to a smaller extent, Europe, the originals. So I'm sharing this bit of information just to point out that even though the designers of Axis and Allies have had to be silent about their games, they're not completely mute. And they have shown the ability to adjust the games in the canon, ostensibly where they felt the games needed it. So this should inspire some confidence in the gaming community that the official support for these games is good enough that you can stick to the out-of-box rules and setup. My second argument is the engineering argument, and this will overlap into the bandwagon a bit, but to be frank, really any strategy board game that you've ever bought, especially Axis and Allies, these things are just mind puzzles. They're sort of like a Rubik's Cube that's meant to be solved to some degree, and like any good brain teaser or puzzle, generally speaking, it is a carefully crafted and engineered item. In point of fact, most of the cost you paid for an Axis and Allies board game is not in the plastic that makes up the pieces, it's not in the laminated cardboard map that comes in the game. It's actually the rules and the setup that you pay, that most of the cost of an Axis and Allies game goes towards. You're paying for the intellectual labor that went into this game, not the actual pieces. My opinion is that part of the fun of a strategy game is the maturing process you experience as you progress in solving it. As you stack more and more games, you'll come up with viable strategies for one side in an effort to win. Then you'll come up with counter strategies when you're on the opposing side, come up with counters to those, and so on and so on. And this is part of the fun of the game, and it's been engineered into that intentionally. So when you change the engineering for whatever reason, it seems to me to be defeating the point of what or why you purchased the game to begin with. I'll also add here that when it comes to strategy games especially, branding really does matter. So Avalon Hill, and to a lesser extent Wizards of the Coast, has a good reputation of making high quality strategy board games that are popular and well balanced. And I mean this specifically and especially with Avalon Hill. But generally speaking, I trust the engineering of a reputable game company over a game or set of house rules that came from a single player or play group. So to sum up this argument, I'm skeptical of anyone who says that they know more about balance issues than the game designers or the company that made the game. So to close, I need to say that I'm not deaf to issues of imbalance. I'm saying that I just think it's healthy to be skeptical of accusations of imbalance and to really only be convinced by good argument and evidence. So I myself am a firm believer that the Axis and Allies Milton Bradley edition from the 80s is technically broken unless you import a single rule from future editions of Axis and Allies. Now, I don't expect anybody to just take that claim at face value. You shouldn't. I have 15 videos with examples, demonstrations, and statistics to back that up. So check that out if you want to see what I think constitutes good argument and evidence for an accusation of imbalance. At any rate, that is the end of this video, so a quick recap is in order. I first started by laying out why I think there's such a prevalence of house rules in the Axis and Allies gaming community, and then I countered with two arguments. One was the bandwagon effect argument, and the other was the engineering argument. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching. All the best from the good captain, and bye-bye.